Hi, my name's Ermal Shimp. I'm with the 1st Ohio Light Artillery, the State House Battery. We represent the state of Ohio at most reenactments. I'm going to talk a little bit about the the food that was used during the Civil War, how it was issued and how it was cooked. Basically, rations were issued in two ways. There was a field ration and an encampment ration. During an encampment, or when they were in camp, they would get more fresh meat. They were issued by regulation, 1.5 pounds of beef or other meat. They were issued fresh bread. The Army was very light on vegetables. They issued very few fresh vegetables, although they were available, and the soldiers did buy them from local farmers. If they were on the march, rations were a little bit different. They were given salt pork or bacon, something that wouldn't spoil. They were given hardtack. Hardtack was a hard dry biscuit. They got 1.5 pounds of that a day, and that was usually at least 12 biscuits. And they were fairly large biscuits, but they were very hard and dry. The soldiers normally ate them by breaking them into small pieces and soaking them in their coffee. They were called tooth dollars by the soldiers because they were very hard. On the march, the soldiers usually marched by foot everywhere they went. So they were issued, if they were going on a 3-day, if it took 3 days to get where they were going, they were issued rations for 3 days and told to cook their rations. So they usually broke down into messes from 6 to 8 people. And those were the guys that slept together in the tent and stayed together. They had to carry everything they had. So they usually broke down and bought what they needed. They would buy a skillet. They would take turns carrying it during the march because nobody wanted to carry it. Same way with coffee grinders. If the coffee was always issued in beans, the soldiers had to roast it and they had to grind it. So they would buy a coffee grinder, a small coffee grinder, and somebody would carry that. And one of the ways they made a little money was a lot of people were lazy and didn't want to carry anything. So what they would do is the unit that bought a skillet would rent it to another unit or another mess and let them use it. So there were different ways they did things. And if they were on the march, sometimes it all depended on where they were and how they got there. They would have fresh beef. Fresh beef would be acquired by driving cattle behind the Army, and when they stopped at night, they would slaughter beef and distribute it to the soldiers. Usually the officers got the best cuts, of course. Railroads were very important during the war. Railroads had come into existence in the 1840s, and by the time the war started, there were railroads, especially in the north, all over, and they could transport food and supplies to a railhead, but then the distribution system usually broke down because everything then depended on wagons and horses to get it to the troops. So there was quite a delay sometimes in the troops getting food. The troops had access to other types of food, and mainly they were sutlers. Sutlers were an independent contractor authorized by the Department of War. And each regiment usually had a sutler. He was the one that supplied the sugar, the milk, the cheese, the fresh bread. Sutler pies were notorious for being indigestible. And they would buy what they needed from the sutlers. Of course, Army pay at that time was $13 a month. And the prices of the sutler were fairly high, so $13 didn't last long. And most soldiers sent a lot of their money home to their family because that was the family's mainly means of support, since the man of the house was away during the war. There were a lot of other things that the soldiers got, like the canned milk. Canned milk was invented in 1854 by Gail Borden, and canning became very popular during the war. But it was too expensive to transport by the Army, so the Army issued very little in canned goods, but it was available with the sutlers. They would have canned beef, canned vegetables. Oysters were a big thing. They bought a lot of oysters from sutlers. Beans, as we know them today, canned beans were available, but all of this was very expensive, so they didn't buy a lot of it. They just couldn't afford it. But food was, and a lot of the food depended on the commanding officer of the regiment. Some regiments were very strict about making sure that their troops were well fed and taken care of. Some brigades were very well taken care of, and other officers just didn't seem to care. And camp hygiene was very bad. Washing dishes. These boys were all farm boys. They were all very young, and they didn't do a very good job of washing dishes or cleaning things. And that's why dysentery took so many soldiers. 1 in 3 soldiers during the Civil War died of disease, and the majority of it was caused by the food and the dysentery and the water they drank. So